Hi, everyone. Welcome to the People Track as we kick off Type 2022 from Women in 3D Printing. We are so excited to have you all here today as we will be welcoming some incredible speakers to our stage throughout the day. So welcome to People. Our first presentation is going to start in just a minute as we welcome Lisa Arafune to the stage. She is with the Additive Manufacturing Coalition, where she is the Director of Outreach. And today she'll be sharing with us advocating for additive. What does Congress have to do with it? So Lisa, I'm bringing you to the stage right now. As soon as you have that, please turn on your camera and your mic, and I'm so happy to welcome you.
Very good. So can you hear me?
Yes, you're perfect. The stage is yours, Lisa. Thank you.
Okay. And let's see. Oh, how do I do the, I know how to do the share. Okay, share. Okay, now I've clicked share. Tell me, can you see it?
Yes, you're perfect.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Well, good afternoon. Thank you very much, Sarah. My name is Lisa Arafune, and I'm with Additive Manufacturing Coalition. Thank you very much for joining us here today. And I really like to be able to engage with my audience. So I'd love to see a lot of activity in the chat box. And I'll do my very best to keep up with your comments and your questions. So let's get started by asking, so what's Gallus Gallux? And drop your best guesses into the chat. Don't Google for it. It's a hint. It's something that many of us eat. It's something you might see at a farm. Chickens. So my father-in-law has a degree in poultry science. And why am I telling you this? It's because we learn from the people that are around us. And I'm curious to know, do you or someone that you know has worked on Capitol Hill in Congress? Perhaps you've done that. Or maybe you've done lobbying in Congress. Maybe you've had a Congressional Visits Day or a Congressional Fly-In. I'd love for you to drop it in the chat to see if we have anybody that's done that before. Good morning, Mara. Okay, well, we'll get going. Well, I've worked in the Indiana State Capitol. I've worked on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C., and I've worked by lobbying Capitol Hill in D.C. I launched and led Purdue University's representation. I led a National Technology Association in high performance computing in DC as well. Today, I'm joined with my partners and my co-founders of the Additive Manufacturing Coalition, Mark and David. Each of us has over 20 years of experience in academic, science and technology, and manufacturing, lobbying, and advocacy. And I've estimated that I've made well over 1,000 congressional office visits. And these are on topics that range from university endowments to nuclear fission to immigration, college athletics, and then of course to my evergreen favorite, funding for the National Science Foundation. And some of you may know that I got my start in manufacturing at the Subaru of Indiana Automotive at the plant in Lafayette, Indiana. I was in research and design, and I used my Japanese language and cultural skills to localize parts sourcing in the United States to increase domestic parts content. So all these different experiences led me here today to form the Additive Manufacturing Coalition. And I really use my expertise to represent the interests of our members to various stakeholders in DC. And whether that's Congress or various agencies, nonprofits, or other types of associations. So what does Congress have to do with it? Well, let me explain a little bit about what government relations entails and why you should get involved. And then we can talk about the federal budget process, and I'll explain about how we can work with Congress and a bit about who Congress really is today. So government relations is a form of external engagement. We focus on influencing policymaking, regulations, and funding at the federal, state, and local levels. And I don't want to forget our international attendees. Much of what I say today is adaptable and useful in many other nations as well. Oh, I see that we have someone that spoke before Congress on additive. Wonderful. Oh, I hope we get to talk sometime soon. So So this influence can happen in many different ways. Unfortunately, most people assume that it's all based on money, but in reality, most of us work in relationships. So like I've said, my partners, Mark and David and I, we have never had money to throw around. We've always worked with relationships and with integrity. We appreciate our networks, and we are trusted to bring solid, fact-based answers and experts to solve the problems that members of Congress or their constituents might be having. So truly, our currency is our reputation. So this picture is from the Society of Women Engineers Fly-In Day, and I was leading this group of industry and nonprofit representatives on Hill visits. And here we are at Senator Ben Cardin's office. So fly-ins and congressional visit days, known as CVDs, are great tools to bring the special interest, and that's you, as the subject matter experts bringing science and manufacturing expertise together with the members of Congress and their staff. Okay, so here is an example of something that happens behind the scenes. This is a policy proposal on workforce development, and it's specific to the additive manufacturing sector. So as an advocate on a day-to-day basis, we develop policy positions and advocate them to Congress on different issues. So this is an amendment to the American Jobs Act, and it's an example of a policy position for this coalition, and it's a workforce development policy. We've heard our members talking about workforce development over and over again, and as an opportunity appeared with the American Jobs Act, we crafted this proposal and we got lots of input from the community. It addresses two parts. There's the manufacturing, teaching, and training aspect, and also an educational grants program aspect. We share it with congressional staff, and then we ask that it gets included in an appropriations bill. Now, you don't always get what you ask for. Sometimes you get something similar, and sometimes nothing comes of it at all. So you're reacting to what Congress is doing or has done, and then you're drafting proposals and asking for reactions from Congress on these proposals. So why would you want to get involved with Congress? And I have 4 answers for you. Number 1, all those rules, the regulations, the policies, they all have something to do with manufacturing sector, and they were written for traditional manufacturing. So it's not that they were written against additive. It's just that they don't fit every aspect of the new additive manufacturing. The technical side, the regulatory side, they need to be codified and sent across all of the agencies uniformly. Second reason, procurement issues. So the way those procurement rules were written, it's again like regulation. They were written with traditional manufacturing in mind. They were written for large manufacturers. So it can be really difficult for smaller manufacturers to crack into that procurement system at various agencies. And this can be especially true for Defense Department procurement. You know, additive is just such a new type of manufacturing, and the ability to take a bunch of parts and then print them together as one part, it's a really complicated issue. And there is just no unified position, and all of the agencies, they're just all over the place on this. And that's part of the reason that there's such a mess, is because the agencies all have different cultures, different agendas, and different approaches to how this should be accomplished. And we have this mental image of government as one big monolithic entity. But in reality, it's lots of different agencies: Department of Defense, Energy, National Science Foundation, NASA, FAA, NIH, USDA, FDA. They are all so very different from one another. And think about the difference in people at each of these agencies. There are career bureaucrats and there are political appointees. Some of the missions are mission-driven. Some of them are peer-reviewed. And then even within those mission-driven agencies, the Defense Department, Energy Department, they're very different from one another. So you have to remember, they each have their own culture. And while it may be the same technology used in different fields or different technologies in same fields, you need to remember the government is not one big monolithic entity. It's very different cultures in each agency. And those of you that are international attendees, same thing. These issues will be true everywhere. And every country will have its own method of addressing the issues. In the United States, we built an advocacy system to address these issues. The UK, the EU, different. And I can't speak to the foreign governments with authority, but these issues will apply to you as well. So your third reason, funding for research or for validation. And depending on who you are, whether you're with a research university, a company, you're an individual, a small business, federal funding for your research can be really critical to your success. Understanding how the federal government decides to spend its money and then how the money gets to the agency and how that gets spent, it's really great to know, and even better if you can be involved in that process. And then you and your family, there are lots of reasons that you should care. There are taxes, financial aid, Social Security, immigration, healthcare. And so all these concepts that we talk about today, they can be applied to all of these different issues. So you can see that this can be a really big topic, but I'm going to try to break it down for you and demystify it for you. Remember, all of you bring a level of knowledge about additive that many in Congress just don't have. They have had really limited exposure to the concepts of additive, and they've just not been exposed to the fact that you can really do 3D printing on a really massive scale, you know, from microchips all the way up to houses. And you've had so much more experience with additive than most people on the Hill, and because they don't know, they are truly open to learning more, and they want you to be their subject matter expert. Okay, so we're going to move on to the federal budget process. So you need to think about the budget in a 3-year cycle. So you're always working in 3 fiscal years at the same time. So the top line, the current fiscal year that agencies are actually spending. The next line, the upcoming fiscal year that Congress is debating. And then the third line is the next fiscal year after that, which the agencies are actively planning. So I'll go back over that again. So the current fiscal year that agencies are spending, and that's like FY 2013 on this slide. And then the upcoming fiscal year that Congress is actually debating, that's fiscal year 2014 on the slide. And then the next fiscal year after that, which the agencies are actively planning, that's FY 2015. So issues can arise in any of these 3 fiscal years. So the current fiscal year issues would normally be about problems that are getting the funds released. That's the FY 2013 line. And then the upcoming fiscal year is what we in government relations are really pretty much focused on. It's about getting Congress to enact something, usually increasing or maintaining funding on what the administration has asked for. And then the future fiscal years are really great opportunities to influence the future programs. So additionally, the fiscal years are supposed to run from October 1 to September 30th. Now, because that September 30th deadline is almost always missed in the most recent years, Congress keeps passing continuing resolutions, CRs, that generally keep the government operating at last year's level for a set period of time. So you should know that we are currently living in a CR, a continuing resolution, which will expire on February 18th, and that's a month away, which means that Congress will need to either pass a budget or another CR by February 18th. Okay, an overview of the budget process. This is an overview. So typically, the administration submits a budget proposal in February. This year, we're looking at an early March budget release date, and Congress can and often does ignore most or a lot of it. But remember, Congress is the only one that has the constitutional authority to spend as it sees fit. The administration itself does have some latitude about how to implement and how to redirect some funding. The Appropriations Committee, and so therefore Congress, they can restrict funds in order to rein in the administration at the agencies. For example, the Defense Department may decide that it doesn't need a certain fighter jet anymore, and then doesn't put any funding for that proposed budget line for that jet. Well, Congress could decide that it wants to keep making them, So they'll put funding for that jet into the federal budget. So really, your main takeaway here is that just because the administration has said a certain program will be funded or a certain program will not be funded, that doesn't necessarily make it so. Which now leads us to how Congress handles the budget process. So after the White House and the agency budget proposal is submitted, Congress starts its own budget process. In theory, the House and Senate budget committees are supposed to make recommendations about how much to spend on various budget functions in whole, without regard to which agency is doing that. Well, however, these functions don't necessarily line up with appropriations subcommittee jurisdictions, so then they get split into multiple subcommittees. The most important element here is that Congress has to set the overall spending level for both defense and domestic discretionary spending for the year. So once that's finalized, the appropriations committees divvy up that pie across the 12 appropriation subcommittees. And this is known as the 302B allocations. These allocations mark the start of the real appropriations process on the Hill. Okay, so just how big is that federal budget? So after my talk, go check out the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, and they'll tell you that budget outlays for 2020 were $6.6 trillion. Now, I realize that this figure that we're looking at is from 2017, but it gives a really great overview of how that federal budget pie is divided up. So everything that's there in gray is mandatory spending, which means Congress has no means of making changes to it. Everything in red is spent on defense, and everything in blue is discretionary spending. That blue is what the 12 appropriations bills are all about. That blue is the tiny part of the federal budget that we hope to have influence over. So in 2020, the red plus the blue was $1.6 trillion, of which just over $700 billion was appropriated to defense, and just over $900 billion was appropriated to non-defense spending. That $900 billion is spent on health, transportation, education, training, veterans benefits, economic development, as well as science and manufacturing. So a quick summary, there's a 3-year budget cycle to be thinking about. The current fiscal year's spending, the next fiscal year's debate and planning, and the future year planning. And remember, the White House and agencies can put out their proposed budget, but Congress always has to fund it. It's the only one with constitutional authority to decide on spending. And that federal budget might be enormous, but the portion that's actually discretionary is much, much smaller. So now that we're all experts on the federal budget and the process, let's talk about working with Congress. Earlier, I showed an example of a policy proposal, and this is a really great thing to do when you already have relationships with Congress. I've also mentioned that making congressional visits and meetings, that these are great ways to form relationships with congressional offices and committee offices. And there's a lot that goes into planning a congressional office visit. And so I'm going to just give an overview of congressional meetings. So various organizations will usually plan a congressional visits day or a congressional fly-in to bring their subject matter experts to Congress. And it's exactly what it sounds like. It's an organized event to bring a number of people interested in a specific topic to DC to spend a couple of days in DC. And generally, you'll have a day or an afternoon in training and then spend a day on Capitol Hill visiting with offices and committees. So in this particular meeting with Senator Tammy Baldwin, she sat and talked with us for the entirety of the meeting, and then she wanted to do a photo, and this is not common. Most congressional meetings will be with staff, and they are professionals, so don't mistake their youth for a lack of experience or lack of influence with a congresswoman. The staff have a portfolio of issues and topics for which they are responsible in that congresswoman's office. And they're always pleased to have an actual expert to come in and educate them on the importance of things such as additive manufacturing and how far it has come in the last 3 decades. Their exposure to additive manufacturing might be about printing tchotchkes, or like my amazing child from The Mandalorian, And you should know that my son printed that for me for my birthday. They likely don't know that we can print human body parts or even 3D houses. So in your meeting, you may not get to meet the congressman, but don't be disappointed. If it's really, really important to you, you need to ask in advance how you can make it happen, and then at least ask for a photo op if that's what you want. So I ran a Congressional Visits Day for the Materials Research Society a number of years ago. I had an Italian attendee from a Western state, and English was not her first language. So not only was she a rare woman in material science, she was also a pregnant woman in material science. And she kindly brought along her husband just in case she went into labor while she was there in DC. So she explained that she volunteered to participate in the CVD because the thought of it just really scared her, and she did not want to do this. You need to know that this is not something to be afraid of, that the fear is far greater than the reality. The idea of these meetings is to have very productive, brief meetings. And the fun part is that they want to get right down to the brass tacks. What you want should be the first thing out of your mouth, and that should be followed up with why it's important. The communication style is very direct and very polite, and you'll be very short on time, and you'll only get a couple of minutes to get your message across. And by the time you get nervous, you're done. So that's essentially an extended elevator speech, and you'll get to do it a handful of times in a day. And at the end of the day, you get to fly back home. So many employers find this to be a really valuable skill because it shows expertise in communication. And you'll also find that a lot of employers spend significant amounts of money on government relations offices in Washington, D.C., because government relations is critical for many industries. And you know, there are a lot of false beliefs about Washington. It's not all about the money. It's not all about where you're from. It's about the relationships you developed. You can choose to be cynical about it, but there are just so many reasons to be positive about Washington. They do pay attention and they do want to learn more, so join us. We need your subject matter expertise, and we need you to speak up and to educate. And while I might know a lot about the process, I need your expertise to help educate those that can really make the change that we desire. I really love that part about representing Purdue University in DC. It was, bringing world-class experts before Congress. It was extremely satisfying. And I also always just learned so much from them myself. Remember, we need to surround ourselves with the experts in different kinds of things, even poultry science. We really should be appreciative of our ability to petition the government about issues that are important to us. Sometimes people really become frustrated with the process, but don't forget, there's a reason that it's hard to get things through Congress. What's good in New Jersey may be a problem in Texas, or what's good today might present an unforeseen problem in the future. The House will always move fast. The Senate will always move slow, and it's by design. And remember, no result is ever actually final. So to wrap up that CVD, she had an amazing Congressional Visits Day, and she did not go into labor. She found that with some education, some preparation, and some guidance, it was not frightening at all. And she even said that it was really enjoyable. So we've seen a lot of change in the government relations industry in the last 20 years. The number of women as elected officials, as well as the lobbyists themselves, has grown tremendously in some sectors, especially in higher education. And I would suggest that there are more women lobbying for higher education institutions than men. And so this brings me to, who is Congress these days? Well, there are 144 women serving in the 117th Congress of the United States. Of the 535 seats in Congress, women hold 144, which is 26.9% of the seats. So I'd like for you to put in the chat, what do you think of those numbers? And I'm curious to know if you think that's a lot, that's good, it's more than you expected, or, you must be kidding me. Okay, well, let me provide some historical perspective. In 1977, there were 2 in the Senate and 18 in the House, for a total of 20 women. And then when I worked on the Hill, there were 9 in the Senate and 56 in the House for 65 women members of Congress. And we had this running joke that there were more men named James or Jim in Congress than there were women in Congress. I don't know if that's still true or not. I haven't done the count. But there's just so much more to Congress than the elected members of Congress as well. So the staff are absolutely critical to your success. The staff do tend to be young, and they're not necessarily scientists or engineers. But the staff are also closer in gender parity, with there being so many women working on the Hill and in so many different capacities. There are a fair number of women as chief of staff and staff directors. So I've mentioned congressional committees a couple of times. So committees are an integral part of the process for a bill to become a law. When a piece of legislation is introduced, it gets assigned to a congressional committee with jurisdiction over that topic of the proposed legislation. Committees are what you frequently see on TV, where they might have an expert witness talking about healthcare or agricultural practices. And the committees take this information, they move the legislation, or they make amendments to that legislation. Members of Congress have been assigned to different committees, sometimes ones where they might have some kind of knowledge about the committee's jurisdiction, but frequently it is based on seniority and networking, as some committee assignments are better than others. The committees have staff to work them, and we usually refer to them as professional staff. In the Congresswoman's office, she'll have personal office staff, and that she's responsible for hiring them, and they handle her issues and committee assignments. And those people will frequently have titles such as legislative assistant or legislative director. And as a matter of fact, you can meet Dalia Sokolov, who is the staff director of the Research and Technology Subcommittee of the House Science Committee, on my forum on Thursday. Now, she does have a degree in engineering physics. And if you're interested in attending, you should know that all my forums are open to everyone. You can feel free to visit my website for that registration link, or just reach out to me later and I'll get it to you. And I want to take this opportunity to tell everyone that I am a founding member of the Katie Bauman fan club. She became that face of the Event Horizon Telescope black hole image in 2019. And when she was invited to testify before the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, I was there. I was waiting right outside the committee hearing room, waiting for her. And she was just really so kind. And we did a selfie before the hearing. And as you can see, there's an image here from a typical C-SPAN coverage of a congressional hearing. So, because so many staff and members do not have STEM backgrounds, organizations like the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, they've organized and supported programs to bring science knowledge into the policy process. They provide opportunities for fellowships and to get to be part of the discussion. Also, congressmen's offices like Congressman Tim Ryan from Ohio and co-chair of the Manufacturing Caucus, he always has a manufacturing fellow, and it's usually somebody from NIST. So we're just really asking you today to consider being part of the solution. This was also part of the impetus for us having the Zoom educational forums for the organization, to educate Congress about additive manufacturing. You know, like I've said, they've seen 3D printing and the interesting objects that are created by them, but many of them just don't understand that we're way beyond that. They need to make policy decisions based on the state of the art. And this is where we all come in. We need to provide fair and real information to Congress so they can make fair and real changes to the rules and the regulations that affect the additive manufacturing sector.
That's amazing, Lisa. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Graphic.
This is my very last slide, so it's perfect timing.
It is perfect timing. I love this graphic. It always delights me. I love that that's your ending one. We had a couple of questions come in, but you did address most of them.
Great.
We're also at time, though. Lisa, I would love it if you would join us on the networking stage later on. We've got some dedicated networking time in a little while.
All right.
And I know that more people would love to connect with you. And as always, it's an absolute pleasure. So thank you so much for joining us today at Tipe. We're very grateful to have had you here. And everyone, thank you, Lisa. Lisa, if you'd like to continue on in the chat or drop any connection information that you have, I know that there are people who would love to continue to be in touch with you and learn from you.
Fantastic.
The events that the Additive Manufacturing Coalition hosts are excellent. Women in 3D Printing is so happy to partner with you to promote and support these. And now in the People track, it is time to move on to our next presentation. So thank you, Lisa. It was wonderful to see you today.